The air in the Suffolk County Family Courthouse smelled like floor wax and old panic. I walked toward the plaintiff's table, clutching a single red binder against my chest like a shield. My husband, Mark, sat at the defense table surrounded by 3 attorneys in charcoal suits. He leaned over, whispering loud enough for the back row to hear. I represented myself in court. My husband laughed. "You are too poor to hire a lawyer," he said. Everyone agreed. I stood up, started speaking. After my first sentence, the courtroom froze. Judge Holloway entered with a rustle of robes that sounded like thunder in the quiet room. Mark's lead attorney, Victor Vance, stood with the easy grace of a man charging $600 an hour. He didn't even look at me. To him, I was a clerical error, a waste of a morning slot that could have been used for a real client. Mark smirked, checking his watch as if he had a tea time to catch. They expected tears. They expected me to crumble under the weight of procedure. For 12 years, I had played the role Mark wrote for me. The simple wife. The woman who needed help balancing a checkbook and asked permission to buy groceries. He built his entire empire on the assumption that I wasn't paying attention. He believed his own lie so thoroughly that he left evidence in plain sight, scattered across shared clouds he thought I was too stupid to access. I smoothed the skirt of my department store suit. My hands were shaking, but my mind was terrifyingly clear. "Mrs. Harrington," the judge said, peering over his spectacles with a look of exhausted patience. "You are proceeding pro se against a specialized legal team. Are you certain you wish to continue without counsel?" Vance chuckled softly, a dry sound like dead leaves scraping concrete. Mark didn't even bother to hide his grin this time. He looked at me the way a wolf looks at a rabbit. Savoring the kill, I didn't look back. I placed my red binder on the table. The sound echoed like a gunshot. "Yes, Your Honor," I said. My voice didn't tremble. I opened the binder to the first tab, labeled Shell Company Alpha, in bold black ink. Vance's eyes flicked to the page, and his posture stiffened imperceptibly. He recognized the name. It wasn't in the discovery documents they had provided. It wasn't supposed to exist. I am representing myself because my husband is currently hiding $3 million in undeclared assets. The silence that followed was absolute. It sucked the oxygen right out of the room. Mark's face went from amused to a shen in a heartbeat. He looked at Vance, panic flaring behind his eyes. But the lawyer was too busy staring at my binder. The confident smile had vanished, replaced by the realization that they had brought a knife to a nuclear war. The judge leaned forward, his boredom evaporating instantly. "That is a serious accusation, Mrs. Harrington," he said. I looked at Mark finally. He wasn't laughing anymore. He looked like he was about to scream. To understand the silence in the courtroom, you have to understand the noise of our marriage. For years, my life was a series of small, humiliating transactions. I stood in our granite kitchen, holding a grocery list, waiting for Mark to approve the budget. He would sigh, pulling a crisp 20 from his wallet like he was tipping a waitress. "Don't spend it all on wine, Gina," he'd say, winking at his friends. They laughed. I smiled. The humiliation burned, but I swallowed it. That smile was my armor. I perfected the art of looking vacant, nodding while he explained simple concepts I had understood since high school. At dinner parties, I was the decorative listener, pouring wine while Mark boasted about market trends and logistics. "Gina doesn't worry her pretty head about numbers," he would tell his partners, squeezing my shoulder possessively. I became invisible in plain sight. A piece of furniture that breathed. He never suspected that the furniture was quietly memorizing every single word. The crack in his armor appeared on a Tuesday night in November. Mark came home stumbling, smelling of scotch and expensive perfume. He tossed his briefcase on the foyer table, forgetting to lock the brass latches. While he passed out in the master bedroom, I crept downstairs for water. The briefcase had fallen open. A single statement from a bank in the Caymans slid halfway out. I didn't touch it at first. I just stared at the impossible balance on the page. Fear paralyzed me, but curiosity was a stronger drug. I memorized the account number before sliding the paper back. That night, huddled under the covers in the guest room, I didn't sleep. I researched. I learned that consulting fees were often code for siphoning profits. I learned about layering and integration. The world of forensic accounting wasn't magic. It was just a puzzle, and I had always been good at puzzles. My fear began to curdle into something useful. My education happened in the dark. While Mark slept the heavy sleep of the arrogant, I was awake with a burner laptop I bought with saved grocery change. I watched lectures on tax law at double speed. I learned to read balance sheets like sheet music, spotting the discordant notes where money went missing. I stopped asking for more household money to avoid suspicion. I let him think I was cutting coupons. In reality, I was calculating his net worth. Then came the physical evidence. One morning, Mark left his phone unlocked on the counter while he showered. The water running upstairs was my timer. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird as I scrolled through his emails. I found the thread with Vance titled, Alpha Assets. I didn't forward them. That leaves a trail. I took photos of the screen with my old phone. The water stopped. I dropped his phone exactly where he left it. The final piece of the puzzle was a gift from Mark himself. A week before he filed for divorce, he threw a stack of disorganized receipts on the island. Sort these for the accountant, he barked, grabbing his keys. Try not to mess it up. I looked down at the pile. Buried in the mess was the transfer slip for the Cayman account. He thought he was giving a servant a chore, but he was handing a detective the murder weapon. Victor Vance didn't let the shock linger. He stood, buttoning his jacket with a practiced sigh meant to signal sympathy for a confused child. He approached the bench, his voice dripping with professional condescension. Your Honor, Mrs. Harrington is understandably emotional. Divorce is a traumatic process, and financial complexities can be overwhelming for those without experience. He glanced back at me, a pitying smile plastered on his face. It was a good performance. He almost sounded like he believed it. Mark leaned back in his chair, the brief panic from my binder reveal seemingly forgotten. He trusted Vance to sweep my little red notebook under the rug of legal procedure. He pulled a lint roller from his briefcase, meticulously cleaning his cuff while Vance droned on about equitable distribution and standard disclosures. He didn't look at me. In his world, I was already dealt with. A nuisance to be managed, not an opponent to be feared. Mrs. Harrington, the judge said, cutting Vance off mid-sentence. Your opening statement, please. Keep it brief. The courtroom settled into a heavy, expectant silence. I could feel the court reporter's eyes on me, waiting for the stumble, the tears, the inevitable plea for mercy. I stood up slowly. I didn't look at Mark. I looked at the judge. I didn't need to shout. I just needed to be precise. The time for being the quiet wife was over. Thank you, Your Honor. I began, my voice steady. This case is not about emotion. It is about the intentional obfuscation of marital assets in violation of Rule 401. Vance frowned, his head tilting slightly. I wasn't using layman's terms. I continued. The defense claims total transparency. Yet, the discovery documents omit 3 separate liquidity events from the last fiscal quarter. I saw the stenographer pause, her fingers hovering over the keys. The rhythm of the room shifted. I opened the binder, the snap of the rings loud in the quiet air. Specifically, I am referring to transfers labeled as consulting fees paid to an entity known as Alpha Logistics. I pulled out a spreadsheet, the cells highlighted in yellow. These fees correspond exactly to withdrawals Made from our joint savings. Rotted through a shell corporation in the Cayman Islands. I held the paper up. It wasn't a blurry photo. It was a clear, printed audit trail. The sound of a pen hitting the floor broke the spell. Victor Vance had dropped his Mont Blanc. He scrambled to pick it up, his face flushing a deep, angry red. He wasn't looking at the judge anymore. He was staring at the document in my hand with genuine horror. He realized then that I hadn't just Googled divorce laws. I had traced the money. The condescending pity in his eyes vanished, replaced by the cold calculation of a threat assessment. Mark sat frozen, the lint roller clutched in his hand like a weapon. He looked from the spreadsheet to me, searching for the confused woman he married. She wasn't there. In her place was a stranger who knew his secrets better than he did. The judge took off his glasses and looked at the defense table. "Mr. Vance," he said, his voice dangerously low. "Care to explain?" The air in the room didn't just change, it evaporated. Vance recovered quickly, smoothing his tie, as if the previous moment had not happened. He called his first witness, Arthur Henderson, the company's chief financial officer. Henderson walked to the stand with the confident stride of a man who played golf on Tuesdays and signed checks he didn't have to earn. He swore to tell the truth while avoiding my gaze entirely. Vance led him through the script. Henderson confirmed the company was illiquid and struggling with market headwinds. "Mr. Henderson," Vance asked, leaning on the podium, "are there any liquid assets currently available for distribution?" Henderson shook his head solemnly. "None. Everything is tied up in inventory and long-term debt obligations." Mark nodded from his seat, his face relaxing into that familiar mask of pity. They were painting a picture of a sinking ship, hoping the judge would grant me a lifeboat of pennies. I watched Henderson's hands. They were trembling slightly against the wood of the stand. "Your witness," Vance said, dismissing me with a casual wave. I stood up, taking a single sheet of paper from my red binder. I did not walk to the podium. "Mr. Henderson, I have no questions regarding your character or your resume." I walked toward the witness stand, my heels clicking on the linoleum. "However, I would like to show you a document marked Exhibit C." The judge nodded. Henderson's eyes locked onto the paper in my hand. I placed the document in front of him. It was a wire transfer confirmation from 2 hours ago. "Mr. Henderson, do you recognize this signature?" He looked down, and his throat bobbed in a hard swallow. He adjusted his glasses, stalling for time. "It appears to be my signature," he mumbled, his voice losing its polished edge. "And the amount?" I pressed. $500,000, he whispered. The microphone caught the tremor in his voice. "And where was this $500,000 sent, Mr. Henderson?" I asked, my voice cutting through the stale air. He did not answer immediately. He looked past me, straight at Mark. It was a desperate, pleading look that screamed for instruction. Mark did not move. He was staring at the table, his knuckles white. "To an offshore holding account," Henderson finally admitted, his voice barely audible. "For tax purposes." The excuse hung there, heavy and false. "So, despite testifying that the company has zero liquidity, you authorized a $500,000 transfer 3 days ago." I turned to the judge. "This contradicts the financial affidavit filed by the defense this morning." Vance jumped up, knocking his chair back. "Objection! Relevance!" he shouted. But his voice lacked conviction. He knew he was fighting a losing battle. The judge held up a hand, silencing him instantly. "Overruled," the judge said. "The witness will answer." Henderson slumped in the witness chair, looking suddenly very small in his expensive suit. He realized he was the one holding the grenade Mark had pulled the pin on. He looked at Mark one last time, but my husband was busy staring at the wall, refusing to make eye contact. The loyalty in the room died right there. Henderson leaned into the mic. "I was following orders," he said. Silence is never louder than when a liar is trapped. The lunch recess did nothing to cool the suffocating heat in the room. When we returned, Victor Vance looked different. His polished veneer was gone, replaced by the jagged edge of a man fighting for his professional life. He abandoned his notes on asset depreciation and picked up a sealed manila envelope. "Your Honor," Vance said, his voice dropping to a somber register. "While financial discrepancies are concerning, they are merely symptoms of a deeper issue." He turned to me, his eyes dead cold. "We must address Mrs. Harrington's stability. We are introducing Exhibit D," Vance announced, handing a thick stack of papers to the clerk. I recognized the letterhead immediately. It was from Dr. Aris, the therapist I saw 3 years ago after my mother died. Vance held the papers like dirty laundry. "These records document a history of severe anxiety, paranoia, and dissociative episodes," he lied, twisting my grief into madness. "Mrs. Harrington has a documented history of imagining threats where none exist." The gallery murmured. Mark covered his mouth, feigning deep emotional distress. Mark took the stand next. He didn't look like the arrogant CEO anymore. He looked like a weary, heartbroken husband. He unbuttoned his suit jacket, loosening his tie to appear vulnerable. "I tried to protect her," Mark said, his voice cracking perfectly on the last word. "Gina gets confused. She sees conspiracies in nothing. That money wasn't hidden. She just didn't understand how business works." He wiped a non-existent tear. "I handled the finances to keep her from panicking. It was an act of love." The atmosphere in the courtroom shifted perceptibly. The judge's expression softened as he looked from Mark's trembling hands back to me. I could feel the doubt creeping into the room like a fog. Maybe the numbers were just a misunderstanding. Maybe the grieving wife was crazy. It was the same suffocation I had felt for a decade in our marriage. Mark wasn't just lying, he was rewriting reality in real time. He was using my own silence against me, painting my patience as catatonic incompetence. Vance pressed harder, emboldened by the judge's visible sympathy. "Did you ever feel unsafe, Mr. Harrington?" he asked gently. Mark nodded slowly, looking down at his hands. "Sometimes," he whispered. "She would stay up all night, obsessing over receipts. I was worried she might hurt herself. It was a masterpiece of cruelty. Every muscle in my body wanted to scream, to throw the binder at him, to shatter his performance. But I sat frozen. I knew that any outburst would only prove his point. I watched Mark carefully. He was gaining confidence, feeding off the sympathy in the room. He believed he had won. He turned to the judge, his eyes wide and earnest. "I never wanted to control her, Your Honor. I only wanted to help her. I gave her total freedom. That was it. The absolute, quantifiable lie I had been waiting for." He had overplayed his hand. He had moved from subjective feelings to objective historical fact. My heart rate slowed down. I didn't need to scream. "Cross-examination," the judge asked. Looking at me with pity, Vance smirked, closing his file. He thought I was broken. I stood up, but I didn't approach the witness stand. I reached into my bag and pulled out a small black USB drive. "Mr. Harrington," I said, my voice cutting through his performance. "You stated under oath that you never controlled me and gave me total freedom." Mark nodded, confused by my calm. "Yes." He had walked right into the grave I dug. "Your Honor, I would like to submit Exhibit E," I said, plugging the drive into the presentation laptop. Vance shot up. "Objection! This is an ambush. We have not reviewed this digital evidence." The judge raised a hand, silencing him with a sharp look. "Is this authenticated, Mrs. Harrington?" he asked. I nodded. "These are recordings taken in our shared kitchen, under state law. I am a party to the conversation, making them admissible." The judge waved his hand. "Proceed." The speakers crackled to life with a hiss of static. Mark shifted in his seat, his eyes darting toward the exit. The voice that filled the room was not the soft, grieving tone Mark had used on the stand. It was cold, sharp, and terrifyingly familiar. "You don't need a debit card, Gina. You are too irresponsible to handle cash." The Mark on the recording laughed, a cruel, wet sound that scraped against the courtroom walls. "If you ask me about the accounts again, I'll cut off the grocery fund entirely. Do you want to starve?" In the witness box, Mark's face drained of all color. He looked like a ghost haunting his own trial. The contrast was physically painful. I let the silence hang for a moment after the clip ended. The stenographer had stopped typing, her mouth slightly open. Vance was staring at his table, refusing to look at his client. He knew that the protective husband narrative had just been decapitated. I pressed play again. This time, the audio was clearer. "Stop crying. You pathetic cow. No one believes you. You have no friends because I told them you are crazy." The cruelty in his voice was so casual, so practiced, that a woman in the gallery audibly gasped. Mark flinched as if struck. Mark gripped the railing of the witness stand, his knuckles white as bone. He opened his mouth to speak, to offer some spin, but no words came out. The recording continued, growing louder. "I own you, Gina. You live in my house? You eat my food, and you exist because I allow it. If you ever try to leave, I'll make sure you end up in a psych ward." The judge turned slowly to face Mark. The look in his eyes was no longer pity, it was a cold, hard disgust. The victim mask had dissolved. "Mr. Harrington," I said, my voice cutting through the echo of his recorded threats. "Is that your voice?" Mark stammered, sweat beading on his forehead. It was taken out of context. We were arguing. I was angry. I didn't let him finish. I played the next file. "I moved the Alpha money to the Cayman account last night. If the IRS comes looking, I'll tell them you signed the papers. You sign whatever I put in front of you." The gasps in the room were louder this time. The perjury was now absolute. This was the kill shot. The connection between the abuse and the fraud was now undeniable. Vance buried his face in his hands, effectively resigning from the defense in spirit, if not in body. Mark looked around the room, searching for an ally, but finding only judgment. The polished CEO mask had completely dissolved, revealing the cornered rat beneath. "I never said that," Mark shouted, his voice cracking. "That's manipulated. She edited it." His outburst only matched the tone of the recording perfectly, proving my point better than any argument could. The judge leaned over the bench, his face a mask of stone. "Mr. Harrington, sit down and be quiet," he ordered, his voice echoing with the weight of the state. "You are under oath, and you are digging a hole you cannot climb out of." Mark collapsed back into the chair, defeated. The lie he had lived for a decade, that he was the benevolent protector of a fragile woman, lay shattered on the floor. He looked small. For the first time in our marriage, he looked absolutely powerless against me. I looked at the USB drive, knowing I had hours more footage. But the point was made. I turned off the laptop. The defense rests on the assertion that I am incompetent and unstable. I said to the room, "The evidence suggests that my instability was a manufactured product of coercion." I looked directly at Mark, and my incompetence was the only thing keeping him out of prison. Mark flinched as if I had struck him. He couldn't meet my eyes. He was staring at the table, watching his life unravel. "We will take a 15-minute recess," the judge announced, banging the gavel with a force that made everyone jump. "Counsel, I expect to see you in my chambers immediately following." He glared at Vance, then at Mark. As the judge swept out, the room erupted into whispers. Vance didn't wait for Mark. He shoved his papers into his briefcase and marched toward the exit. Mark sat alone in the witness box, a king on a crumbling throne, realizing that the quiet wife he mocked had just become his executioner. Stepping out of the courtroom felt like surfacing from deep water. The hallway was loud, filled with the mundane chatter of lawyers and clerks, who had no idea my life was detonating inside those mahogany doors. My hands were still trembling. Not from fear, but from the massive adrenaline dump of playing those tapes. I leaned against the cold plaster wall, trying to breathe, clutching my red binder like a lifeline. I needed water. I needed to sit down. But before I could move toward the fountains, a shadow fell over me. It was a tailored, charcoal, gray shadow. Victor Vance stood there, stripped of his courtroom theatrics. He looked tired, his tie slightly askew, the sweat on his upper lip betraying his calm facade. Mark stood a few feet behind him, staring at the floor, refusing to look at me. The dynamic had inverted. Usually, Mark led and people followed. Now he was hiding behind his lawyer like a truant schoolboy. Vance gestured toward a quiet alcove near the elevators. "Mrs. Harrington," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "We need to talk." I followed them, not out of obedience, but out of curiosity. The alcove was dim, smelling of stale coffee and litigation. Vance didn't waste time with pleasantries or intimidation tactics. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a fresh notepad, clicking his pen with a nervous rhythm. Mark leaned against the wall, crossing his arms tight across his chest, his eyes finally meeting mine. There was no love there, only calculation. He was assessing damage. He was wondering exactly how much it would cost to make the problem go away.
"Look, Gina,"
Vance began, dropping the formal Mrs. Harrington entirely. "The judge is angry. If we go back in there, things get messy for everyone." Mark could face significant complications with the IRS. You could spend years in appeals, seeing absolutely nothing. He paused, letting the threat of a long, expensive war hang in the air. "We want to offer a settlement. A lump sum. Today." It was the standard play. They wanted to buy the silence they couldn't enforce. They wanted to seal the cracks in Mark's armor with cash. Vance wrote a number on the legal pad and slid it across the small table between us. I looked down. It was $5 million. More money than I had ever seen. Enough to buy a house, a new life, and silence the screaming anxiety about my future. It was a golden parachute, tax-free. Vance added quickly, watching my eyes. "Immediate transfer. But it comes with strict conditions." I knew the conditions before he said them. Non-disclosure agreements, sealed records, a retraction of the allegations. It was a bribe wrapped in legalese. Mark stepped forward, invading my personal space for the first time in months. The smell of his cologne, once comforting, now made my stomach turn. "Gina, be reasonable," he said, his voice dropping to that soft, manipulative timbre he used when he wanted something. "You win. You proved your point. Take the money. You can travel, start over. You don't want to ruin me." He reached out to touch my arm, but stopped when I flinched. "We were a team once. Don't destroy the company just to be right." I looked at the number again, then at Mark. He wasn't sorry for the abuse. He wasn't sorry for the fraud. He was only sorry he got caught. If I took this money, I was selling the truth. I would be agreeing that his reputation was worth more than my dignity. I would be signing a contract that said my suffering had a price tag, and he could afford it. The simple wife would have taken it. She would have been grateful. But that woman didn't exist anymore. "It includes a full NDA. Vance confirmed, mistaking my silence for consideration. "You destroy the recordings. You agree that the testimony was confused." The word hung there like rot. Confused. They wanted me to gaslight myself legally. To sign a paper admitting I was crazy, just rich. I felt a strange calm settle over me. The same calm I felt when I first found the Cayman statements. The money wasn't a gift, it was a muzzle. And I was done being quiet. I closed the red binder. "No," I said. The word was small, but it hit them like a physical blow. Vance blinked, stunned. Gina. Look at the number, Mark hissed, his face reddening. You are walking away with nothing if you push this. I shook my head, meeting his eyes with a steadiness that terrified him. I am not walking away with nothing, Mark. I am walking away with the truth. I saw the moment hope died in his eyes. It was replaced by a pure, unadulterated hatred. He knew he couldn't buy me. We're done here? I said, turning my back on $5 million. I walked back toward the courtroom doors, leaving them in the dim alcove. My legs felt light, unburdened by the weight of a secret settlement. I could hear Mark swearing behind me, a low stream of vitriol that no longer touched me. I wasn't fighting for a payout anymore. I was fighting for the public record. I didn't want his money to silence me. I wanted his consequences to scream. We walked back into the courtroom. But the air had completely changed. It no longer felt like a place of judgment for me. It was an arena for him. Judge Holloway returned to the bench with a stack of files that looked heavy enough to crush a man. He didn't look at Vance. He looked straight at Mark, who was now slumping in his chair like a child sent to the principal's office. The silence was different this time. It wasn't empty. It was waiting for the hammer to fall. Mr. Harrington. The judge began, his voice scraping the bottom of his register. This court finds your testimony not only inconsistent but perjurious. Mark flinched as if slapped. Holloway continued, listing the infractions